Hi, I'm Allie, and today I'm going to be talking about celiac disease and how to avoid gluten if you have celiacs or if you are just gluten intolerant or sensitive to gluten. First off, what is gluten? Gluten is a protein that is found in certain grains, wheat, barley, and rye. And so what is celiacs? Celiacs is not an allergy. A lot of people have this misconception, but it actually is an autoimmune disease where your immune system attacks your body's healthy cells. And in this case, with celiacs, they attack the villi in your lining of your small intestine. What are villi? They're these little finger-like things that line your small intestine. It's where your body absorbs the nutrients in your food. When people who have celiacs eat gluten, their body immune system attacks the villi. And so what happens is they just slowly get mowed down like this. And so eventually when food goes through your small intestine, your body has no villi. And so then your body can't absorb the nutrients. You can become malnourished, and lots of other different diseases actually can come from celiacs. So it's a very serious disease. Some people may not have celiacs, but they are sensitive to gluten, or they're intolerant to gluten, or they are just allergic to wheat. How do you find out you have celiacs? Well, the best way is to actually get an upper GI endoscopy. There's also blood tests you can do, and some doctors either swear by the blood tests or they don't think that they're actually very accurate. You can also just try cutting gluten out of your diet if you suspect that you might have problems with it, and then you can see if your symptoms and problems go away. Our story is back in 2015, my husband Michael got an endoscopy and colonoscopy done for some other issues. And what actually happened is we got a phone call telling him that when they did a biopsy of his small intestine, they found out he had celiac disease. And we were just blown away. It completely took us by surprise. And so we immediately just took wheat out of his diet. And so I've been his personal chef ever since. Some symptoms you may experience when you have celiac disease is diarrhea and bloating. Those are the two most common symptoms. It can also manifest itself in many other different ways, like it can cause really bad migraines or headaches. Also, you can get brittle nails from it. In the case of my husband, when we found out he had celiacs, he wasn't really showing any symptoms that would make us think he had it, except for maybe bloating or weight gain. It was when we took gluten out of his diet that he started having diarrhea or really bad bloating if he were to have gluten again. The number one most important thing for you to do is to always check labels on all of your food products. And when you're checking labels, you need to make sure that it says it is certified gluten-free. Most products will have it on their labeling, but sometimes you have to look really hard to find it. It might be just in little tiny print underneath the ingredients list, or it'll be like a little circle that says GF on the front of it or on the back. Other times there are some products where you have to look it up online and the company will say all of our products are gluten-free. Another thing you have to look out for is just because you might not see wheat, rye, or barley in the ingredients list doesn't mean it is gluten-free. Right after Michael was diagnosed, we thought he could still have Frosted Flakes because it doesn't have wheat in it, right? But we actually found out later that it is not gluten-free because it has malt in it, and malt comes from barley. And so Frosted Flakes, not gluten-free. There are lots of other products like oats. they can be contaminated with gluten. And this is because on the farms where wheat and oat are grown, the oat field might be next to a wheat field. And so some wheat grains might get mixed in with the oat grains. And so you have to, when you buy oats, you have to buy gluten-free oats. Some companies use gluten in their manufacturing process. And this is very confusing because they don't actually have to put gluten in their ingredients list since it's used in manufacturing. An example of this case is ice cream. You have to look for gluten-free ice cream. The companies use it as a thickening agent. So even if your ice cream doesn't have wheat in it, it still might be contaminated with gluten because it was used in manufacturing. When you have celiacs, you need to watch out for cross-contamination. This happens at restaurants or even on manufacturing equipment for companies where they use the same equipment to make the gluten-free food that they also use to make foods that have gluten in them. A certified gluten-free product will be made on manufacturing equipment that is completely free of gluten, and it only processes gluten-free foods, and it never touches gluten. Some products will say that it is gluten-free, but it was manufactured in a facility that also processes wheat foods. And that just means like in one room, it'll have equipment that is certified gluten-free, and in another room, it will have equipment that processes wheat products or something. But so they're in separate rooms. And so in that case, you should be fine. You will also need to make sure that your home is a safe place for you to be able to cook and eat in. The best way to do this is just to not have any gluten in your house. When there are other people in your house that can eat gluten still, that does complicate things a bit. So make sure that your countertops are a clean working surface. Make sure you have gluten-free designated cutting boards and also knives, pots and pans. If you use pots and pans that have scratches on them, gluten from previous meals can stick around in those scratches. And so if you try to make a meal in those gluten contaminated pots or pans, the gluten can actually seep into your food and contaminate you and give you problems. If you will be having gluten-free bread and then also regular wheat bread in your house and you like toast, you need to make sure that you have a gluten-free designated toaster. If you just use the same toaster, then you're going to get cross-contamination there. You'll probably have to buy a new toaster anyways because your toaster will be contaminated already. So if you're the only one in your family who has celiacs and has to avoid gluten, make sure that you have your own butter tub so that you don't get crumbs on your butter from other people's breads and toasts. And the same goes for peanut butter and jams. Make sure that you clean your knives and other serving utensils. When you are trying to bake gluten-free, there are some products that you have to watch out for. Vanilla. If you use imitation vanilla, it will have gluten in it. They use it to color the imitation vanilla. So you have to find pure vanilla extract that is actually labeled gluten-free. You have to find gluten-free soy sauce because, once again, some companies use gluten to color their soy sauce. You need to find gluten-free butter, gluten-free cheese, because some butter and cheese might be contaminated from the equipment. Here's a list of some products where they will normally have gluten in them, and so you have to check to make sure that they are certified gluten-free. Cereal, granola, chips, cookies, crackers, and nuts. Nuts can be tricky because Gluten-free nuts are so expensive, and for us, it was really hard to try to buy gluten-free nuts, and so we've kind of just been a little more lax on those and just buy regular nuts. As long as they don't have anything else in them, like no flavorings, or if they're butter toffee peanuts, you should be fine. Unless they say on there that they are manufactured on the same equipment that manufactures wheat. But if you have the money, great. Go ahead and buy certified gluten-free nuts. If you don't have the money to do that, you just have to try it out and see if you can handle it or not, if your body tolerates them. You have to watch out for gluten in processed meats, like hot dogs or sausages, or even just regular ham. Some roasted chickens also have wheat in it, used as a dusting for the spices also. So you have to look for gluten-free roasted chicken. Medications and over-the-counter pills, you have to watch out for gluten in those and make sure that you buy and they say gluten-free on them. Vitamins and supplements. You also have to watch out for frozen products like frozen hash browns or frozen shredded cheese, because some companies use gluten to help with those products so that they don't stick to each other when they're being frozen. So you need to find gluten-free shredded cheese and gluten-free hash browns. And also make sure that your peanut butter and jams are gluten-free also. Basically, only eat foods where the label says that it is certified gluten-free, and stay away from the foods that don't say it. Now, there are some products that are gluten-free, but they will never say that they actually are gluten-free. And these are obviously fruits, vegetables, potatoes, dairy products like milk or half and half, heavy whipping cream. Look all over the cartons. You're not going to find them say that they're gluten-free. I know, I've tried. But they really are, and you should be fine. There are other types of intolerances that may come as a result of having celiacs, like lactose intolerance and being intolerant to corn. A lot of people who have celiacs also have problems with corn. What happens is in the villi, in the small intestine, those are where your body produces the lactose enzymes to break down the lactose in your dairy products. So when your villi gets mowed down from celiacs, your body can't produce the lactose enzymes anymore, and so then you become lactose intolerant. If you can start avoiding gluten and heal your gut, those villi will grow back, and then they can start producing lactose enzyme again. And so then you might be able to grow out of your lactose intolerance. There are two stereotypes or myths about the gluten-free diet that I would like to address. One is that when you start a gluten-free diet, you're going to gain weight, because that actually happens to a lot of people. But that's because a lot of the gluten-free products out there use corn and other less healthy grains in place of wheat, rye, or barley. And so people start eating a ton of those gluten-free foods, and they're actually less healthy than their gluten-containing counterparts. Also, gluten-free foods are packed with tons of sugar in them in order to make them still taste good. Sugar basically turns into fat in your body if you eat too much of it. And so, of course, if people start eating sugar-filled, gluten-free processed foods, you're going to start gaining weight. My advice is, if you want to go on a gluten-free diet, try to stick to whole natural foods and have less processed foods. For example, you can go out and buy some gluten-free cookies and have some gluten-free bread, but eat those sparingly. So eat a lot of whole fruits and vegetables, meats, rice, potatoes, and then as a treat, have the gluten-free processed foods. If you clean up your diet in addition to going gluten-free, you might actually end up losing weight instead of gaining weight. The second stereotype is that gluten-free eating is expensive. Yes, gluten-free processed foods are more expensive, but if you try to stick to eating mostly a whole food natural diet, then you won't have to buy as much of the gluten-free processed foods. And when you're making homemade meals, you really won't notice not much of a difference because fruits and vegetables are gluten-free. That part of your grocery list won't change. There are so many more gluten-free options out there now than there were like 7 years ago or even 10 years ago. Some of my favorite gluten-free products are Udi's, Annie's, Bob's Red Mill, Amy's Dinners, Knick. To find gluten-free recipes, Pinterest is a great place to go. I often say that Pinterest is my best friend because that's where I've found virtually all of my gluten-free recipes. And so many more people out there are experimenting with gluten-free baking, and so they have a lot more gluten-free recipes out there now. Gluten-free baking is a frontier in of itself. When we first found out Michael had celiacs, I did so much baking that it was insane. Gluten-free baking can be super easy, but then also it can be super hard. I have made loaves of bread where they came out of the oven and they were rock solid hard and I just had to throw them away. I've made lots of cookies that went flat. So when you do gluten-free baking, you have to accept defeat probably half of the time until you get more experienced. Some of my gluten-free recipes I have actually tweaked and made them a little different than the actual recipe that I got. Stores have a lot more gluten-free options for baking. They'll have gluten-free brownie mixes or cake mixes. There are tons of gluten-free flours out there. There's potato flour, rice flour, almond flour, oat flour, coconut flour. There are gluten-free flour blends like from Bob's Red Mill, Cup for Cup. The options are endless, but they will not be the same as wheat flour. All of those flours cook really differently, and the gluten really helps bind food together like in bread. And so if you don't have the gluten, you have to use some other binding agent in your baking to help the food bind to each other. I can do another video in the future for gluten-free baking. If you want me to do that, please leave a comment. I'll make a video about gluten-free baking. Eating out and being gluten-free. It's very difficult to do that, but it is possible and you can manage it. A lot of restaurants have gluten-free menus. When you go to a restaurant, you need to tell the waiter and make sure that they know that you have celiacs and have to be gluten-free. A lot of restaurants have specific workplaces for gluten-free food so that there's no cross-contamination, and they use gluten-free utensils and countertops, and they wear gloves. Chipotle's is really good, and also Red Robin. They're really good about making sure that their workspaces are gluten-free. Obviously, there are some foods that you won't be able to get and eat when they're gluten-free if you eat out at a restaurant, so you might just have to make those at home. For pizza, it's a lot better to buy a frozen pizza at the store than get pizza delivered to you from like Domino's or Pizza Hut. I have found that the frozen gluten-free pizzas actually taste better and they are way less expensive. Some challenges to the gluten-free diet and having celiacs is obviously there's a lot of social challenges. if you go to a party and there's no gluten-free foods, you can't eat anything. And so a lot of people end up just not wanting to socialize because they can't eat when everybody else is eating, which that is very difficult. But eventually I think we just need to either bring your own food or let your party host know that you have to eat gluten-free. In some cases, you may just not be able to trust what other people make, and you only trust yourself and only eat foods that you make. The most important thing is to just always be on guard and never let your guard down. Everybody handles a gluten-free diet differently, so figure out what works for you and how sensitive you are, and what may work for one person may not work for you. So you have to do a lot of trial and error and get to know yourself and your limitations. I hope that this video was helpful and help you navigate through the gluten-free world. Don't think that your life is over. You can do this. It is possible. So many people have gone through it before you, and they can give you lots of advice. Thanks for watching this video. Please like and subscribe for more tips and tricks on how to avoid gluten and how to live with celiac disease.